The Tuatha meaning the folk of the goddess Danu, also known by the earlier name, the Tuatha tribe of the gods, are a supernatural race in Irish mythology. Many of them are thought to represent deities of pre-Christian Gaelic Ireland. The Tuatha are often depicted as kings, queens, druids, bards, warriors, heroes, healers, and craftsmen who have supernatural powers. They dwell in the other world, but interact with humans and the human world. They are associated with the Shay, prominent ancient burial mounds such as the Bruna Boyne, which are entrances to otherworld realms. Their traditional rivals are the Fomorians, who might represent the destructive powers of nature, and whom the Tuatha defeat in the Battle of Mag Tuired. Prominent members of the Tuatha include the Dagda, the Great God, the Morrigan, the Great Queen or Phantom Queen, Lugh, Nuada, Angus, Brigid, Manannán, Doncrach the Healer, and Gwyddnu the Smith. One of the Trí Danann, three gods of craft. Several of the Tuatha are cognate with the ancient Celtic deities Lugh with Nulgus, Brigid with Brigantia, Nuada with Nodens, Oima with Ogmios, and Gwyddnu with Gobanus. Medieval texts about the Tuatha were written by Christians. Sometimes they explained the Tuatha as fallen angels who were neither wholly good nor evil, or with ancient people who became highly skilled in magic. But several writers acknowledge that at least some of them had been gods. Some of them had multiple names, but in the tales they often appeared to be different characters. Originally, these probably represented different aspects of the same deity, while others were regional names. The Tuatha eventually became the Shay, the Shay folk, or fairies, of later folklore.
Kingdoms rise and empires crumble, and the knowledge and wisdom from past ages are lost to the foggy ruins of time. But for genuine seekers of truth, one place stands alone on a hill, shining brightly in the darkness. You, dear listener, have reached the Hidden Citadel.
Okay, so now let's count it. 1, 2, 3. All right. Welcome to the Hidden Citadel with your hosts Greg Kemp and Willie Minix. And before we started, we were talking about about our gardens and how roses and tomatoes really work well together. But one of the things that we were continuing our discussion from last time is about Ireland. And I mentioned to my son-in-law's mom, Ireland looks like the kind of place that you could plant a dollar bill and it would grow money.
Oh, yeah.
It's just the ground is so fertile there. And I was studying.
And he knew it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's totally. So I've been studying the history of. Nobody really knows where the original Irish people came from, but there's a theory that they originally came from Greece. And that's why a lot of the older Irish people, the older stock, if you will, of Irish people were dark-haired and kind of darker complexion than the people that came through the Vikings, which were red hair and light complexion. That's why when I first heard of Enya and I saw her for the first time, I was like, she doesn't look Irish, she's got dark hair, you know, and of course being a naive young guy still in school when she first came out, I was like, I didn't even think about what she could be dyeing her hair. I just naturally assumed that was her hair. But I think that is her natural, because like when I met her brother, he had dark hair too. So it's like, that whole area, the people are more dark-haired. And so I think that those would probably be from the more ancient Irish families that would be over in that part of in Donegal. Over there.
And I think it's funny because like the history includes like I think like 6 basic
I don't know, inhabitants. There was like an original, like there's 6 waves.
Yeah.
And
Well, and their
but
mythology is in those
in
they're sectioned like that too.
correct. I
So
think
you
that's
have the original mythical period,
yes.
then it's followed by the Ulster cycle,
Yes.
right? And then it's the stories of Finn McCool, which doesn't that sound like such a Steve McQueen kind of name, Finn McCool?
Yeah.
It should have been one of his characters.
Finn McCool. It's just so interesting though. There is mythology, but then when you go there, it's not like, you're not like in Beloit, Wisconsin going, there's some mythology here, and you can't quite make the mythology fit with the people of
it's
Beloit,
real
Wisconsin.
hard when you can point to a fort and say, yeah, that was Finn McCool's fort.
Yeah.
And then turn around and say, yeah, he was mythical. Really? Well, who built the fort?
Exactly. Like in this case, you have there, whatever the mythology is. I know that several people, like some monks and some different kinds of scholars, were trying to link essentially not only Israel, but pre and post flood theories.
Yeah.
To Ireland. That it was a high place. There was a place that perhaps they could survive.
Legends that maybe certain people being a loose term, characters,
yes,
maybe spirits, whatever. Like the Tuatha-De-Danann.
Adanan. Yep.
Yeah. Tuatha-De-Danann. I don't want to say it wrong because my son-in-law might hear this and then poke fun at me.
Yeah. He's a dude, though. He'll be fine.
Yeah, he'll pick on me anyway. But I probably butchered that. The Tuatha-De-Danann came from somewhere after the Fomorians were there.
Yes.
Now, the Fomorians were supposed to be giants.
Yes.
Who asked me...
Who were skilled in what?
In all sorts of crafts and
particularly
warfare.
Agriculture and military.
Yeah, that's true. And this was allegedly before the flood, I think, but maybe not, because when you look at the people that are doing historical research, they're basically saying that if the Fomorians were real people, they probably came in about, I think it was 600 to 900 BC. And that's way after the flood. But then again, maybe that's not true. That could be the Tuatha-De-Danann could have came during that time period. I'm not really sure. I'm still kind of confused about what, and so some people are saying, well, maybe the Greeks were the fair people, that came over, or maybe it was somebody else that came in. But the point is, you had asked me last time if Finn McCool was the giant that built the Giant's Causeway.
Yeah.
And I looked it up. He was the one that's supposed to have been the giant that built the Giant's Causeway, except that's the only story in Irish legendary that actually has him as a giant. Most of the time, he's not.
Oh.
Which is really strange. I thought that was an odd thing. However, when you get back to who's the guy that was before him that was the big hero in the Ulster cycle?
Dagda?
No, it would be
Cessair?
No, Mac something.
Oh, okay.
Mac, he's named after the guy's dog that he killed. I can't remember. Coolian or Coolhannen? Coolhannen?
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Hold on. Oh no.
It's something Coolhannen, I think.
There's just so much. I mean, look.
Anyway, he was supposed to be basically a Nephilim. He was part divine. But there's a big connection between the early Irish myths and the stories about Troy. Now, we know that Troy was not a myth, that it really existed, and the Battle of Troy and the war and all that actually existed. But they talk about, well, this guy is the Irish Achilles, and this guy is the Irish Hercules, and this is the Irish, because they think, well, maybe a certain tribe of Greeks went to war with another group of people, and then they got pushed out, and they went up to Ireland, and that's where they brought their own legends, and over time, the language changed, and which is an interesting thing. We've talked about this, you and I remember back when we lived in Texas, having the discussion about language and how language is a constantly changing thing.
Yeah.
And what I'm interested in too is there's a part in Genesis where it talks about during the days of Peleg that there was the division.
Yeah.
And it said I think it's something about each tribe had its own language. But then later, at the Tower of Babel, God confused everybody's languages. So some scholars I've read say, well, that's saying that that's happening at the same time, that Peleg was a contemporary of Nimrod, when the tower was being built.
Yeah.
And so, but then other people say, no, there were other languages that developed even during the early times, and then God used that again to cause even more confusion. And really, that same story you see in the ancient Chinese tales of Shang-Ti or Shang-Di, and how he caused a rift between people, and he had them all divide out. And in their legends, the Chinese were the keepers of the ancient knowledge. And really, I mean, if you think about it, China has been not quite the same language, but it's essentially this. It's like Greece, the same language from the ancient times all the way up to nowadays, to the point where it's not too hard for a modern Chinese person to make out some of what's going on in the ancient Chinese. It's they can, and then modern Greeks can go to the. Have you ever found yourself invited to an event and not really knowing what the right apparel was to wear? If you wear something that's a little too classy, like a suit or something, you might feel out of place if everybody else is casual. If you wear something too casual, you might look around and notice that everyone else is dressed up and say to yourself, I'm just not dressed up for this occasion. Well, here at the Hidden Citadel, we have the perfect solution to this problem. Why don't you go buy yourself a Hidden Citadel tee today, and you can wear it anywhere. It's perfect for every occasion. You can wear it to a casual meeting. You can wear it to a business dinner. You could even wear it to a formal event such as a wedding or a funeral. All of these places and more are appropriate to wear a Hidden Citadel tee. And what's even more wonderful than just wearing the Hidden Citadel tee is you'll be supporting the work that we're doing here at the Hidden Citadel. So why don't you do yourself a favor and go buy yourself a Hidden Citadel t-shirt today. The link is down below in the description. Have a great day. And they can read what it says, because the language has changed a little bit, but Attic Greek is not that much different. That's what I studied in school before I studied Biblical Greek.
Yeah.
My college taught Attic Greek.
Oh, wow.
So that's what the Greek that I first started on, and so it's like you can go to the Acropolis and you can read, nothing has really changed that much.
That's amazing.
In all that time. Where normally, if you think about English, take a kid off the streets, like where I live, if you take some punk that lives down, and is spraying graffiti on the walls, and you go and ask him to read Shakespeare, he's not going to understand any of it.
Yeah.
And even an educated person, sometimes if you go further back and read Chaucer or Beowulf,
Beowulf
I
is
mean,
tough.
you're really stretching to try to understand and grasp what's being said there. Beowulf's a lot easier if you understand German.
Yeah.
And by the time we had to read Beowulf, I had already taken some German, so it was a lot easier. But it does not seem like English at all. And that's why you've got Tolkien making a translation, quote unquote, of Beowulf or Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, because the language has changed so much by that time that a translation is required. But Greek didn't do that. I mean, Greek has stayed the same, and it's strange that it hasn't changed that much.
Well, okay, so there's a couple things. One is, in the mystical sense, if there's a Greek tie-in, not necessarily people of Greece, but the Greek tie-in to what we've been kind of discussing about Ireland, is that where do we first see more of the legendary status of Nephilim? Where do we first see that? Well, we see that in Greek mythology. We see the combinations.
Well, Greek, and I would also add Indian.
And Roman, right?
Yeah, and Roman.
But I mean, when you talk about Hercules, Hercules is right. You're talking. I mean, it's like right from if you. I mean, the first thing you think of, I think, and there were heroes of renown, men of renown. Yeah. There were Nephilim in those days. When you read that in Genesis, I think you kind of get the feeling this is a god man. This is this.
Yeah, and so here's something else.
But what if it's not from Greek? They're not Greek in terms of genetics. They're Greek in terms of that was where they appeared, and then they moved. By the way, that one of the big, I don't know of any other place in the world that has been almost deemed the New Jerusalem.
I know.
Ireland is the only. They're thinking it's, and why? Because it has all the same components.
And they're also connecting things like Tir na Nog, which I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, with Avalon. But then other people are saying, well, maybe Ireland was Avalon. Yeah. Or possibly parts that sank. I want to talk about something else that's interesting, though, is in the Bible, when Paul's writing to the Galatians, they lived north of Greece. Yeah. That's where they're from, and then they spread out, and they stretched all the way from that area to France, up into Britannia, and then into Ireland. That whole area and parts of Germany were all Gallic areas, which of the only people left that we really mention that are of that descent now are the Irish and the Scots. I will say that Wales, Cornwall, and Normandy, and parts of France, all that is still influenced by, if you think about French is basically Latin and Gaelic mixed together. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. But the other thing that I wanted to say, going back to the Greek myths, is when you study the connection between the Greek myths and the Indian myths and their mythology, they're very, very similar. And some people say, okay, well, that's because, the people started out in Upper Mesopotamia in what would be Iran, and they divided and went in two different sections. And one section went to the Greece area, and one section went to the India area. That's one theory, but my theory is when Alexander the Great came and conquered, who are the Brahmins in India? Oh, yeah. The Brahmins are all people descended from the Greek class, which is why the Brahmins tend to be a lighter-skinned people, and the people that are under the Brahmins tend to be a darker-skinned people, but they know that the darker-skinned people are the indigenous race of India, whereas the lighter-skinned people, they're genetically are connected to the Greeks. So I'm thinking what happened is the Greeks came in, they established their stronghold there. They couldn't really take over all of India, but they were the ruling class because that's what they did in the Levant too, and everywhere, and even in Egypt. And so over time, their mythology became the dominant mythology. And so I think modern Hinduism is probably the closest relative to ancient Greek religion,
I see.
in the world. And then you have, so that's leading me to talk about this one thing that I really talk about, is that I was listening to somebody talk about Hercules, and they were saying, well, the Trojan War was probably contemporaneous with about the time of Joshua and the book of Judges. And I was like, wait a minute. If the Trojan War, or it was a little bit after the book of Judges. So if the stories about Hercules and Ulysses and all these people were after the book of Judges, then that means they were after Samson lived. And so we've got Samson living, and I think, and Dr. Heiser was talking about before he died that he was working on or thinking about talking about the connections and similarities between Samson and Hercules. But he, in one episode of one of his shows, I heard him say, I don't think they were the same people.
Yeah.
And I want to get into that at some point. And he died before he ever got to, and I really would have liked to have heard his take on it. But I'm thinking, I think they were the same person, because there's enough time period between when Samson lived and when the Trojan War happened that there could have been a legend of Samson that had gone throughout the whole area, and people could have told stories about this guy. And then
I see what you're saying.
When the war happened, they said, oh yeah, that sounds like something he would have been involved in.
Right.
And they just added him to it, where maybe he didn't, maybe in the midst of a war like that, where you've got enough time between when it actually happened and when Socrates lived, or not Socrates, Homer lived, if that amount of time was enough to create great legends and say, oh yeah, Achilles was the son of Apollo and, was part divine and all this kind of stuff, then, unless the Nephilim were at it again, or the fallen angels were at it again making more Nephilim, which is possible. There could have been multiple incursions, but it seems like if there's enough time for legend to develop, then you're going to hear the stories get, from other cultures get sucked in to these other stories and become part of the myth, And I think that's what happened with the Irish legends. Is it sounds like these stories were brought into Ireland, and they were just retellings of something. Like they talked a lot about, it's Cuchulainn. I can't remember his name. I wish I could remember, but he was supposed to have been a legendary charioteer.
Yeah.
And one of the guys that was discussing this said, how is it that he could have been a charioteer when you can't ride a chariot around the bogs up there?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
But I don't know. Apparently, one of the things that converted the Irish High King was he told St. Patrick, you need to raise him from the dead. And so he raised him from the dead, and he came back with his chariot and his chariot driver and his horses and everything. It's like,
that's quite a resurrection.
It really is. And the thing is, it's like we live in, I was studying, well, I wanted to go to St. Patrick's grave. I didn't know there's like 4 St. Patrick's graves until I started doing the research.
Right.
And then I thought, well, how long ago did St. Patrick live that, that he could, they don't know where he was buried. And it was like, he lived in 400 AD. And I'm like, dang, that is a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's like you're talking about, and for Christianity to spread that fast, if you think about it, America's only been around a little over 200 years.
Yeah.
And our, governing system they've tried to put it in other places, and it doesn't take off the way that Christianity did. Although, we're talking about Jesus and the gospel
Rather than
going
democracy.
forth,
Right.
rather than democracy. But still, the point is, for something to spread that fast is just phenomenal. And I have people that I know that are pagans, and I'll talk to them. I'm like, have you ever considered, you've rejected Christianity and you've gone back to pagan theology. Have you ever considered why the early pagans converted so easily and readily to Christianity?
Yeah.
It's like they didn't just convert for no reason, and they didn't fight it much. Some of them did. I mean, but for the most part, it was just en masse. They just converted.
But I think when you have nothing else, and you have a world that's kind of looking, like to your point about Samson and the possibility that the feats of Samson went around the world. I think the people were. It would be a very easy subject to hold on to and to spread. I mean, right now, any sort of celebrity becomes world famous very quickly. But that there was a dearth of heroes and celebrity back then. So one major miraculous work could easily just become like you said, become the stuff of myths and religions and stuff. But we got to come back to Ireland because it's a little different. This is going back to what you talked about last time. If you really look at why would they have the oldest written language, again, for their boundaries? And their writing, and the Ogham can be that it was written. Some of the translations of Ogham can be the tool that was used to chisel into the rock. It's not just, there's two things here. One is the skill to be able to chisel into the rock a language. But guess what? That language was meant that you were assuming those who were coming to your property were literate. And now that's a huge thing for a bunch of farmers.
And the other thing that's interesting too is if these people came from Greece, why not bring the Greek alphabet with them? Why the Ogham script? Because it's really strange. I mean, it's a line. If you haven't seen it, you need to go look this up.
Oh, I saw it.
It's a line. No, I mean the listeners. Oh. It's a line with like little dashes all along, and it means something.
Yeah.
It's like, who came up with that? And it's been there for, I mean, it stretches way, way back into history. It's one of the earliest writing systems that there is.
Right, and it has to be agreed upon what all these letters mean. I mean, it's almost like miraculous. It's almost because you almost has to be simultaneously just given to everybody, because otherwise the amount of the evolution that it takes for some people to have it, some people understand, some people to it's like there was.
Well, if you look at language, like one of the modern equivalents to what you're talking about is it the Cherokee script? Sequoia came up with the Cherokee script, and he said, okay, I see what the white people have, and I want to build my own script. And he created something. It's really neat. If you ever get to go to Cherokee, North Carolina, you can. I bought a book somewhere on the Cherokee language. And it's really fascinating how he came up with it. And I think that he based his language and his script on an already existing language and script. Mm-hmm. But the Ogham script, the only thing in the area that we look at that's similar is the Futhark, which is the runic alphabet that the other like the Vikings and the other people in the area were using, which I could be wrong about this, but I think the Ogham script is older than the Futhark, and then later the Futhark kind of replaced the Ogham script.
Is Ogham
the Druids
Is Ogham the proper pronunciation? Because I just saw I read it. So I read Ogham.
The
Ogham.
GH is a silent
Okay.
in Gaelic.
I gotcha.
In fact, anything H, it seems to be silent or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It's strange. Like FH, I think is a V sound.
Yeah.
It's just weird. But yeah, GH is a silent letter combination, so it's Ohm.
So like, okay, let's go over some of the other kinds of things that make the Ireland in general just kind of a very unique, not only mystical, but there's something very parallel or integrated into what we know from the 60s, the 66 books. There's
Yeah.
like, for instance, they have, now it's not only the agriculture, and they have that sort of they kind of the intelligent manipulation of creation. They weren't
Yep.
just surviving; they were subduing. They had
Yep.
they were mastering what they were given. But look at
Yeah, and
look at some of
it's such a
let's look
quick-
at some of the tropes they have in their mythology. All right, they have something that's called and I can't pronounce it, but it's like Ciaomh and then Silius. It's the sword of light, and the sword of light
Okay.
flashed not unlike the cherub that's guarding
Oh, yeah.
the way. All right, they have the stone of destiny. It's called the Leah Fail.
Yeah.
The stone, right? All right. Is there anything in Scripture that is it's called a stone, but it's a stone that's the future of the work of Christ? Well, we'd say that about
Yes.
Peter, as
Yep.
upon this rock I will build my church. Now,
Yeah,
there's
but even before that, you've got Jesus as the stone that the builders rejected.
the stone, the capstone, yeah. So you have a
Yeah.
stone there. The other one of the most prominent tropes as well, the spear of Lug, and the spear of
Yeah.
Lugh. Is there a prominent spear in Scripture? Yes, there is.
Yep.
Right, and then
The one that pierced Jesus' side.
here's Jesus' side. Then you have, it's funny,
And that was the spear of Longinus.
Longinus, yeah.
So you've got Lu, again, the GH is silent.
Yeah.
But still, it's LUGH, and I'm like, why do you have a GH? Why even have it there
Right.
if it's silent?
Right.
But then you got Longinus, LONG.
Yep.
Is there a connection? I don't know, but it's really
It's
fascinating.
very interesting. And then then you just look at the peoples who are coming in there, who are going in and out of Ireland. And it's interesting because you have this group, the fourth people from Ireland, were called the Firbolg.
Yep.
FIR and then BOLG. And the first word means the men of the people, right? The
Yep.
BOLG is translated in many different ways, and that some of it is like the bags, which means they're nomadic people. They're guys who carried bags. The BOLG could be that they wore baggy clothing, that sort of thing.
Oh.
But there's one translation of it that's bellows. That these were
Like
these
they
were
knew how to make fire.
Fire, mastery of
Well,
fire
and what
of
the
weaponry,
Firbolg
blacksmith
is similar to the original dwarves of
exactly.
Scandinavian myth.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I got
It's
the
I don't
dwarves,
understand.
which is really interesting.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of elements of the Irish mythology. As I'm reading it, I'm like that you can almost see where Tolkien got it. But then
Yeah.
it's just like, but it's not. Some of it is not. It's not just like. Mythology is a hyperbole, an extension, an exaggeration. In its general form, it's a huge exaggeration from reality. When we talk about Ireland, it doesn't have that same feel to it. It feels like, wait a minute, it's not the mystical part of it, or even magical or anything like that, as much as it feels like there are some real elements here that this is based on.
Right.
But
that's the thing that gets me,
Yeah.
and it's like there are some pretty crazy, wild tales, but it seems like Did you ever listen to Steve Quayle?
Oh yeah, a little bit.
Steve Quayle used to say that most myths of the world had some sort of truth that they were based off of, but the Irish myths, they seem way less crazy than I would say, like say the mythology of Greece.
Yeah,
You know, like the mythology of Greece doesn't seem to be rooted in, oh, this is how this actually has to go, you know, whereas the Irish mythology seems to be a lot more connected to reality.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Even though there's still the veil of the fairy land and there's still, you know, some of these things that are in the spiritual realm, but it's like it's really rooted in planting, harvesting, building, all the things that has to happen if you're going to have a society that's functioning.
Oh, see, that's what's so interesting. It is their belief system, and not the mystical or magical, but their just basic belief system was very highly successful and highly intelligent. There, I mean, some walls. There's some masonry there that is far more intact and has been that way for 500 years than what we have here by experts using, the most modern measurements,
concrete and things like that,
stuff and chemicals, right? And we should have it down, but what they've had to get, they understand, because they understand the entropy, they understand the weathering, they understand it's not just making a product, it's like them making their product fit into the creation.
And it's different than modern Ireland, because if you go to Dublin, there's some old buildings there from the 1700s and things like that, but they're not built the way like the old forts. By the way, it's Cuchulainn is the guy that that rode the chariot that I was trying to think of. But yeah, I mean, the construction is not the same, and somewhere along the line, modern society has missed out on how things used to be done back then. They used to build things for permanence.
Well, look what they're doing. The modern society, if you take, you pour new cement and try to build something into a hillside that has old rocks and old whatever, you have a good sense of how the entropy is, or how the gradual deterioration is going to happen with what you built.
Yeah, if you understand, even have planned obsolescence.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But if you understand how to build something into the existing creation, you are allowing it to integrate and not disintegrate.
Well, and that's really what Tolkien's getting at when he talks about the hobbits.
Yeah.
In a hole in the ground lived a hobbit.
Yeah.
And the elves who lived in the trees. And that's really the Tuatha De Danann, is they eventually withdrew from Ireland and back into the trees. And so now they've diminished and they're smaller, but they're still powerful.
Yeah.
And they live, as spirits of the trees or of whatever, the hillside or the I don't know if it's the animals necessarily, but maybe the lake and things of that nature. It's just kind of interesting that's how that happened.
Yeah, but
and that's part of the whole explanation.
One of the things that I had hoped, and you'll have to do it the next time you go, is you got to go to Newgrange. And
I saw pictures. I really need to go there.
Well, you know what they call that? They call that whole area, and it's called like the Brunaboyne or something like that.
The Brunaboyne.
Right? But that whole region is supposed to be essentially the doorway to the underworld.
Isn't that amazing?
But
have you
the Newgrange itself is not just it's just a building thing. First of all, the intricacy of how it was built and how old it is. It's older than the pyramids of Giza. It has the same measurements to the kind of the celestial bodies that everything else, that all the other things did. It has, it follows all the the alignment with the different kinds of stars and the different kinds of longitude and latitude kinds of things. But then, there's something else about it that it just, if you follow everything that's going, it's just like there's something a little bit more sophisticated, but also, is it? You could almost kind of go, if there were a doorway to the inner part of the earth, this would be it.
That would be a good place for it.
But what other place is there that even has that legend? Again.
Well, think about this. So, yeah, the pyramids do, unless you listen to Zahi Hawass. Yeah. Solon talked about how when he went to visit Egypt, they took him down in the labyrinth underneath the Sphinx, and that apparently this underground tunnel system connected to all the different monuments and things like that. And then who knows how far down it went, because it was set up to confuse people coming out. The labyrinth where the Minotaur lived was kind of like that too.
Yep.
And it's like, here's my thing. Why build something like that?
Yeah, yeah.
That's a great endeavor. Why do you want to build an underground chamber? It goes back to our Hollow Earth thing. It's like there's something that people thought or knew. There's something down there in the depths that we need to confuse to make it hard for them to get up.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because you got to almost look at like the language of what's happening there. Is what's happening there, is it containing what's within? Is it confusing what's within from coming without? Is it preventing those who should not go within from gaining access, being confused? Or is it even greater than that? Does it have some astronomical value that something outside of the Earth is somehow being prevented from getting to the Earth because of whatever this thing is doing? Does it have a different power than what we even understand? Or
so
almost think about Ogham, right? Or Ogham. What's it called? Ohm. Ohm is a boundary point that says, "Do not come on my land. This is my land," right? What if Newgrange, if you go from the sky, is some sort of symbol that says this, like it's in Infinity War. Remember Infinity War?
Yeah.
When they're talking to what's his name, Ebony Maw. Earth is closed today. Right. You're trespassing in the city and on this Earth. I mean, I feel like,
but maybe not from the sky, maybe from within.
Within, yeah.
And so, like, okay, we need to get Rob on here sometime. We both have a friend, people, named Rob, and he's cool. He's a boat captain, and he's got all sorts of interesting stories. One of the things Rob told me is he was sitting overlooking the Hudson across from West Point.
Yeah.
So he was on the Westchester side, him and some friends, and they were sitting there watching, I don't know what, the boats go by or something, and all of a sudden, out of the water, a UFO just rose up, and then it shot off, and he said it was massive, and you could see it, almost like you could look into the windows of it. It was so close to them. And it just shot off overhead and flew away, and he said, but it came from out of the Hudson River. And he said his thinking was, if they're not aliens, maybe the Army has built these things. Mm-hmm. And, he was a Navy Seabee, so he built a lot of stuff for the Navy.
I didn't know that.
And he was like, maybe there's some sort of an underground base in there under the Hudson that, they can fly out from there.
Yeah.
And it's some sort of a test vehicle. Or he said he thinks it could have been aliens too. He doesn't know either one, but the point was it came from within the Earth.
Yeah.
And when you're watching the Skinwalker Ranch show, a lot of the lights and the orbs are coming out of the mesa, out of the ground, and flying around wherever they do their things. A lot of times and then you've got the whole crop circle thing where the crop circles are appearing on the ground. And almost as if they just happen. There was a video footage I saw of a crop circle forming, and people were like, we can't explain this, but you can watch the video, and it looks like a sped up picture or something, but all of a sudden the wind is blowing, and then all of a sudden a crop circle formed.
That's wild.
This is the weirdest thing I'd ever seen, and I don't know if it was fake or not, but the point was, if it's not fake, it's appearing from the ground as if something underneath was causing it to happen. Just kind of like, it looked to me, it reminded me of like when you're a kid and you got one of those magnetic, the fuzzy face guy that you put the beard on, and you take the magnet from underneath and you move around the little magnetic pieces. That's what it looked like when the crop circle was forming.
Wow.
But it was grass and not magnetic pieces. And so it's like, you've got all this kind of weird stuff happening, and people are like, oh yeah, it's coming from outer space. But the source is always inevitably underground. You know? And it's like, what if Newgrange and the pyramid and the Sphinx, and of course, I can't remember the guy's name. He was a geologist that studied the Sphinx, and he took just a section of the Sphinx, and he took it to a geologist in England, and he said, how was this rock formation formed? And the guy said, oh, it clearly was formed by water. And then he took off the tape, and he showed the head and the tail of and the feet of the Sphinx that he had taped up so the guy couldn't see it. And when the geologist saw it, he was like, oh, well, that's strange. But he was like, his initial impression was this was all done by water. Well, that would put the Sphinx back to the, like, you know, they're always talking about the Younger Dryas period, but that would have been, you know, possibly in the same time period as Noah's flood.
Yeah.
You know, and Noah's flood could have covered the Sphinx. Perhaps the pyramid was there. Perhaps the Sphinx was there at that time. Perhaps Newgrange was there at that time. It's possible, my thinking, that maybe the Nephilim they heard Noah preaching.
Yep.
And they said, okay, what if we go and we set up things that'll help us survive the flood? The thing that I'm struggling with a little bit is I like the idea of a second incursion, because I don't want to denigrate the Bible as not being God's word.
Yeah.
I do have a problem with the time period, because it does seem that Noah probably existed earlier than the math of the Bible. But then there's also the idea that some of these names in the Bible are actually tribes, and so their time periods could have been longer. I don't know what I think about that. I'm still trying to learn. But
yeah, but the second incursion, even Misler said, I mean, it just says the same as the days of Noah. Well, what was happening?
There'll be another incursion at the end of time.
Yeah, or there's an incursion just even going on right now. It's just a different.
It could be, and you needed an incursion if they were going to stop the Messiah from being born. They just would have kept at it.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. The idea that the ancient monks thought that somebody survived the flood, I have a hard time with that. I have a hard time, but it does seem when you study comparative mythology that a lot of the stories from other mythologies are about other people surviving the flood, and aside from Noah and his family, and even the Jews, the ancient Jews had stories of people that survived the flood other than Noah. So I'm like, I don't really know what I think about that. I'm still thinking through that kind of stuff. I just don't know what to think.
Well, yeah, I still think it's so interesting, because there's one character that he was not on the ark, but he essentially had an immortality to him. We talked about him last time. No, Cain.
Oh, no? Oh.
Cain, right? And
yeah, but the Book of Jubilees talks about how he died.
Oh, it does?
It says that basically a rock fell on him, and thus his death, because if he hadn't died, if I remember right from reading the Book of Jubilees, it said that he would have defied God's condemnation of you will surely die, you know, and that death will come upon all men after Adam and Eve sinned. And so, but God promised that Cain wouldn't be killed.
Right.
So it was as he was building his city, a rock fell off of one of the buildings they were building and crushed him.
So by accident.
And that's how he...
The earth took him in. Yeah.
The earth took him.
It's so interesting, too, because, all right, what stops the wrath is, when we are redeemed, there's a mark that's put on us, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And, there is when, God put a mark on Cain that no one would be able to kill him. It just seems like you could align those. If you took out Jubilee, whatever.
Yep.
The story would almost seem like Cain would, because he was destined just to wander.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but he was destined to that, but he rebelled even in that.
Yeah.
The very first thing he did is he went to the land of Nod and he said, I'm building a city.
So
what's fascinating about that is you could look at that in two ways. You could say, wait a minute, where were the people?
Yeah.
You don't have a city with one person.
Yeah.
So maybe his idea was, well, I'm going to build a city for all the people that will be my descendants. Or there were other people other than just Adam and Eve.
Right.
But either way, it's still rebellion, and I'm not going to wander. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm not going to follow what God said.
Remember you were talking about the parallel with Greek and Indian?
Mm-hmm.
There's a place, I forgot where it is. It's called the Kedarnath.
Okay.
And
I don't think I've ever heard of it.
Oh, it's really kind of cool. But anyway, the Kedarnath, there's a translation of what that means. It's the Lord of the Field. And this guy was considered the Lord of the Field, and he was supposed to be one of the, just like one or two aspects away from Shiva. And
okay.
But people would go to him and ask him questions about things. And he was supposed to be like wise, and he's supposed to have like an immortal sense to him. Lord of the Field. Yeah. Cain was a Lord of the Field, right?
That's true.
So but this particular area is, people would come to him because it's almost like he had been there forever, and they would just kind of go to him. But at one point, there's this and this part is absolutely true. There's this like monastery kind of thing that's at the base of a mountain, and I've
heard of them.
And this flood came down, and there's a huge flood. It was destroying it, but it did nothing. And this is true. Did nothing to the monastery, because when the flood came down, there's a dividing rock at the bottom of
and it just split the flood.
And it went either side of the monastery, and the monastery was untouched.
That's amazing.
I'll send you the link. It's crazy. When you read about this, you read about all that stuff, you can almost kind of put some of the characters of Scripture into that.
But you know who that reminds me of? It reminds me not of Cain. That reminds me of not Iraq, Sumer.
Yeah.
The Sumerian version of Noah, Utnapishtim, who was the wise person that had lived so long that everybody would go and ask wisdom from. And if you think about this, what would it have been like in the ancient times if somebody could live 500 or 600 years and everybody else started dying out younger and younger and younger? You would be around, but your great grandkids would say, yeah, that guy's immortal, Yeah. And so it's like with the gods of the ancients, the ancient Greeks, the idea that maybe they were just some of the early people, that maybe they were the descendants of Ham or Japheth or whatever. They lived way longer than their descendants lived.
Yeah.
And so people would be, this is what Steve Quayle used to talk about, is that there probably is a grave site. And I think he talked about this in one of his books, that you can go to Zeus's grave or you can go to Apollo's grave or whatever. I don't know where, I didn't understand where he was basing that on.
Yeah.
But the idea that people would say, oh yeah, that mountain is the tomb of one of the gods is fascinating, because that means that those people eventually did die, but they lived such an astronomically long life that people assumed during their lifetime that they were immortal.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. It's interesting.
And I would think that a lot of the Indian myths are a reflection of that. I think that probably Krishna is probably one of these sons of Noah or whatever,
Yeah.
or maybe he either is one of Noah's sons or he was a descendant that still had a long lifespan.
Yeah.
And that would account too for the idea of reincarnation, because let's say you come back to your town and you see, great uncle so and so, and you're like, that can't be great uncle so and so. That he looks young and healthy, and I saw him 60 years ago. That's got to be a new, or maybe he inhabited some new body or something. And that goes back to Ireland too. Is that apparently the early Irish had a belief of some sort in a type of reincarnation, that you would die, but instead of completely disappearing or going off to Valhalla, or like the Vikings thought, what would happen is you would go and inhabit the spirit. Your spirit would go inhabit a deer, and then maybe it would go into a tree, and then eventually it would be reborn, and then you would come back as you.
Right.
And that's what happened with, I think Cuchulainn, that happened to him, and I think it happened to, some of the Furbolg, or I don't remember all the stories, but that was kind of their idea on reincarnation. It wasn't the idea that, it was very similar to the Hindu idea,
right,
in a way. Transmigration of the soul.
Oh,
That's
I see.
what the word I'm thinking of.
It's it's just so interesting. I think there's two elements here. One is the land, and this goes back to like the Jerusalem idea. The land that God just loves is Jerusalem, and that the land itself. There's something to it. There's something to the land of Israel, right?
Yeah.
It's the place where he wants to dwell. It's the place that he loves that, and it's so interesting that all the land around it has oil, and Israel is the most fertile for growing and
That's true.
producing life and produce. And
does Israel have oil too? Is it a?
It's not.
This is my
really
own
doesn't.
ignorance.
I don't know whether it does. It's not really a producer of oil, but everywhere around it is.
That's true.
But Israel,
Fascinating.
but then Israel has just a natural vilification from everything around it. Even though everything around it technically, hey, you guys have all the money, you have all the oil. Like, why? What is it about this land itself? There's something.
That's
right?
true.
And so Ireland has this land itself. It's a rich land. It's got a lot of elements to it. But then also it's either attracted people or attracted some very legendary kinds of elements in these people. Like when you really look at those who like the early settlers and the early elements of Ireland, and then you go and look at like the Hyksos who went into Egypt, who were they called them the shepherd kings. And they were just shepherds who came in basically almost like, I don't even know, they just came in and stunned Egypt. And just like, whoa, we can't do anything about these guys. They're too powerful. But they're shepherds.
Yeah.
That's all they were.
Yeah, exactly.
But they were so powerful and so dominant. And Egypt feared them that they almost ruled Egypt. Because Egypt, their government could not do anything about these guys who were not even making war against the government. They just moved in.
Right, they just moved in.
So,
but
that seems like the same kind of people that were in Ireland. They just were masters.
Yeah.
It's almost like they were so powerful because they were a part, of the planting and the sowing and the.
If they weren't giants like the Firbolg, that they claimed or the Fomorians that they claimed were giant beings, the idea of looking back and saying, gosh, these people dominated everything. They were giants.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe they didn't literally mean that. Maybe it started out as a figurative thing, and then with the storytelling, it just got...
That could be, because what?
So maybe that was
Because
how it
in the
happened.
language of anything, I mean, if you're going to get someone to say, well, what made them greater than the mighty Egyptians? You know,
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, they must have been bigger than them.
But I want to go back to the Ohm script too. Have you seen why they stopped using it, or does anybody know? Did it just got replaced with runes or something?
Well, I mean, language is so, from the book of Kells and from what's the other one? The more what's it called?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
The other one. It starts with an M,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
It does, but I don't remember what it's called.
Language. It's just the language really just became more complex and technical, and if you're in Ireland, you're hearing just the like you said, an average person off the street, their articulation is unbelievable. They're probably, the average person uses what we call verbal pauses, like and and like and those kinds of things, probably at a much lesser rate than we do here. Why?
Well, they're very poetic.
Yeah.
Over there. I'm
Specific-
not going to say that with the younger generation. The younger generation seems to be losing that.
Yeah.
But the older generation, they're very poetic, and I don't know about the or the thing, but there are so many where we would go to an or an they have turns of phrases that they would slip into those spots, I think. And like one of the things I noticed was my son-in-law's uncle would always say, "Oh, who's your man?" And I'm like, "Who's my man?" And I told my son-in-law, I was like, "What does that mean?" And he was like, "Oh, well, who's your one is you're talking about a girl. Who's your man? You're talking about some guy. And if you can't remember their name, you'll say, 'Oh, who's your man?'" And I was like, "That's such an interesting."
Yeah.
Thing, because we wouldn't say anything like that,
That's hysterical. I don't know. I just think
There's
there's just two. So I mean, you have the land itself, and then you have the people that have come in and out. You have the subduing and the kind of just the excellence that is. I mean, because there's building. But there's surviving. It's beyond surviving. It's mastery. Like the original command to Adam is to subdue.
Yeah.
And it's not just like the animals. It's he was put in charge to do work. Like he was doing things.
Well, and that's my thing with Adam is Adam's first job was to name all the animals.
Right.
But then I think probably what would have come next is to name all the plants. And the things like that. And I heard, and you know how much I love Calvinists. That's sarcastic people.
Yeah.
But I heard a Calvinist guy talking about how his philosophy was that at a certain point, Adam and Eve would not. He was saying that angels have gotten to a point where now they're locked in and they're not. They can't fall away. I don't agree with that because we see falling away in the end times. And he was saying that I think that Adam, after be locked in, and he wouldn't have fallen away. I don't know that I agree with that either. It's an interesting idea, but what I think is every single person is they're presented with their own opportunity, whether they're going to serve God or not.
Right,
So
sure.
it's like God knew the fall was inevitable, whether it would be and that might explain the other people.
Yeah.
If there were non-fallen people that, lived in the land of Nod, who knows? Maybe they were, I don't know. It's a fascinating thing, but
Oh, okay, hold on. But you got a point here though. In order to die on the earth, you have to be a component of earth. You have to be, right? You'd have to be something that lives and is an aspect of earth. and is not immortal, right?
Yep.
So it makes a lot of sense that which would survive the flood does not fall in the category of all the stuff that was destroyed made of the earth.
That's true. And like fairies, if they are elemental spirits, they wouldn't have been subject to the destruction of the rest of the earth. Their job would have been, well, we got to rebuild. God wiped it out, so let's put it all back together. So unless they were fallen, but even at that, the flood was only to wipe out the bad humans and the Nephilim.
Right.
It wouldn't have wiped out the fallen angels. The fallen angels, their punishment was to watch their children die, and then they were sent to chains of darkness. Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know. This is such a deep topic when you're getting into the ancient history of Ireland, and I wish I understood it better because it's such a vast. Each epoch of mythology, whether it's the mythological period with the Firbolg and the Fomorians, or if it's the Tuatha De Danann era. Yeah, or if it's the and with the Firbolg, wasn't it Balor of the evil eye?
Yep.
You know, his eye shot out fire and consumed, and that was a fascinating. We could get into that, but then you get into the Cuchulainn and the Ulster period, and then you get into the stories of Finn McCool, which the stories of Finn McCool is a lot closer in time, I guess, to St. Patrick's time. And then we didn't talk about this, the whole thing about when St. Patrick got rid of the snakes in Ireland. The snakes were not, copperheads and water moccasins. They were these Loch Ness monster kind of beings that lived in these lakes that had multiple heads, and I think it was...
I didn't even know this.
What?
I've never heard of this.
I just found this out this week,
so
last week.
We got to talk about this next time, because...
Oh, yeah, it's pretty fascinating. But then we also need to talk about, I think it's Saint... Who was the saint that started with the C that was the big Irish saint? Columba?
I don't know.
I'll have to look it up. But he sent one of his servants across the water. Yeah, right, Columbo. He sent one of his servants across the water because the Loch Ness creature, whatever he was eating, and the king was like, look, if your guy can go over there, then I'll convert and become a Christian. He's, okay, jump in the water and swim over there. And so the guy did, and he held the creature back, and we need to get into that.
All right, we'll talk about that next time. Awesome.
But gosh, we're just stuck on Ireland for a while, but I guess that's okay.
Might. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like one of those things. There's so much to it, and it does not. But it's not condensed to just Ireland. It's there's something that connects it to so many different aspects.
The whole Arthurian legends and the Scottish stuff. I mean, man, we can. There's a lot to talk about with this.
All right,
stuff.
We'll either pick it up next
time.
time.
All right, people.
Or we'll cover a new topic.
Well, at least we should talk about that next time, and then maybe we'll move on to. I feel like we could do 10 more episodes on the Inner Earth. Too, or the Hollow Earth idea, because that tied in with this one too, and it's just seems like we can't get away with this stuff. But all right, people, that was the you've been listening to the Hidden Citadel, and tune in next time, and we will continue this interesting topic and conversation about the mysteries of Ireland.
The watchman replies, morning is coming, but night will soon return.